Increasing numbers of people are waking up to the need to live more harmoniously with the earth, with one another, and with all life on the planet. We cannot continue as we have been, and other ways of living are possible. I am your host, Epiphany Paris, and I am one of the many holding space for this transformation. In this time, we can reconnect and share our gifts with one another. This show features conversations with rainbow warriors, healers, activists, artists, writers, farmers, and many other people who are living the questions and living the change in their personal lives. This show will focus on practical solutions, radical strategies, paradigm-shifting ideas, inspiring people, and spiritual transformations. This is the space between. In this space between the destructive times we have been living and the holistic way of life that is possible, we are here. What will we do with the time we have? And we are live now with Sissel on the other line. I'm going to introduce the show just a little bit. Thank you everybody for coming on. I'm very excited that we have listeners and the show is happening. It's awesome. So this show, if you want to know anything more about it, it's connectingbetween.com, but the name of the show is The Space Between. And each episode, I'm hoping, will tell a story. And the story of today's episode is as follows. As we experience and grieve the death of our old ways of living, we can grow into new ways of knowing, connect with our inner genius, and embody our true awesomeness in the world. In this way, we can create change by living our fullest self. So that's sort of the things we're going to be talking about today. And as I said, we have Sissel on the other line, also known as Sisalfish. Can you hear me all right?
I can.
It's so exciting to hear your voice.
Well, thank you. You too.
So Sissel is a trance facilitator who works with the group Trance Shamans. She's a death worker who helps people transition through both physical and symbolic death, and she's also a hypnotist. You are a woman of many talents, Sissel.
Well, I get bored easily, so I had to go a lot of different directions.
There you go. And I was going to ask, do you see a connection between these three things?
Between?
The death work, hypnotism, and the trance facilitation.
I do. I mostly have come to realize that, you had said that that you wanted to talk about changes in the world and how we can help facilitate those changes. So a lot of the people I talk to these days sense that we're moving towards something and that things are changing. They sense that things are speeding up for many of us. And my sense of it is that many of us, and I mean many of us, are asked to help birth whatever's coming. Some of the people I know seem to have an idea of what that's going to look like, and they associate it with things like Mayan calendars or other theories about what's happening. Mm-hmm. I don't much have a theory about what's happening. I have felt from the time that I was very small that something was being asked of me to learn and to do, and I just always so hoped I would be able to figure out what that was. I was talking to someone today, and we agreed that for each of us, the big thing is, hearing the call. If I can just hear it, I'll take it from there. I just need to know what it is that's being asked of me. And I think what is asked of me usually involves bridges between things, between life and death, between this side of the veil and the other, between what is coming, between here and what is beyond that. And I really don't know much else. All my work seems to be leading from one place to another. And I'm pretty good at seeing where I think we're going and moving groups there, and that's about all I know. But death work does that, hypnotism does that, and so does trance. And I really feel most myself when I'm doing one of those things.
That's very powerful.
It is. I feel really lucky. As I said, from the time I was very small, I just wanted to know, and for the longest time I didn't. It was really affirming when I realized a lot of the things I'd done that seemed unconnected, like studying myth, doing oral interp, which in school, in competition, which trained me to use my voice and to speak extemporaneously. A lot of things that seemed unconnected came together in these things, and suddenly, especially when I found trance, many of the things that I had done, I realized were very related under this one thing, and I already had quite a bit of background in them without knowing it.
So your intuition really led you to the things that you would need to do. I'm going to make that conclusion.
It doesn't feel like intuition.
No?
It feels like, okay, so I'm going to say destiny, but that's with the assumption that everyone has a destiny. Not like, oh, I had a destiny, and poor you, you don't. I think everybody does, and I think it takes, but then too, that kind of question gets really tangled.
Yeah.
like, how much of this is my own subconscious? When I'm in ritual and I feel the presence of the goddess, how much of that is my own subconscious being that, leading me? I've just decided my subconscious is the closest and purest connection I have to the sacred, and I don't always understand how it works, and I can't always separate where I stop and it begins and the sacred begins, and I've just kind of given up and just said, what needs to happen happens, and I'll just go with that. So,
well, the conclusion. I'm sorry.
I guess I was always going to this work, and I don't know how I got here. How much was intuition? How much was something else wanting me to get here? How much was my own subconscious knowing that something was coming and this was needed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are really funny, like fuzzy lines of definition. And it reminds me of a conversation I had with Canyon, a mutual friend of ours. Once I did it, I aspected for a ritual down at Diana's Grove, and afterwards she asked me if I personally believed that it was a deity outside of me or if it was my own archetype, subconscious kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And my answer is both and neither, and I don't care. Like, to me, they're different words for the same thing, maybe. And if they're not, like, I'm okay with either definition. Like, either definition works for me, whether it's my own internal deity that's in there or if it's something external to me that I'm connecting with through my very deepest inside. To me, both of them seem like they work.
Yeah, and I think if you ask those questions and try to figure that out enough, you end up in the place of does it work? Mm-hmm. Because you can't answer the question, so the question becomes, was this something worth doing? Did this serve? Did it, and if it does, I guess different religions have a different definition of faith, maybe. But for me, in what we do, that's faith. That if it is worth doing, if it serves me and the group and others or the sacred or, in whatever way that looks, then I have faith that it is what it is, and I may not have to explain it since I can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that definition a lot, or that question, that way of looking at things is, does it work?
Yeah, and it comes up a lot with aspecting. People ask, what happened? How was it for you? Reclaiming has some really, they're so good at taking nebulous stuff and making it clear, giving it a process where you can talk about it. Mm-hmm. And they've done some excellent work with aspecting, and when I work with women on learning to aspect, I use their material a lot. and they can line it out, and they have levels, and I think different people come at it at different levels, and so it's different for people, and then at some point it just becomes mystery.
Right. You don't necessarily need to define it, but it's there.
I'd like to define it, but that just is not. I mean, I know some things, but I just don't know everything about it. And I, instinct did lead me about maybe 10 or 15 years ago to dedicate myself to mystery. But I have to remind myself sometimes, look, you did that. You said you would never understand everything, that some of this was beyond understanding. So quit whining about it and just be okay with not understanding. And a lot of its power, I think, comes from that. So,
well, and that's really one of the big themes of both of the interviews today, is the line between knowing and not knowing, and also the need to define things is sometimes a habit that's born of the world that's really into compartmentalizing things and really is about definitions and roles and sort of a standard way of being that we don't necessarily all fit into anyway. That's my thought on it anyway.
Yeah, that's another fuzzy line.
I like fuzzy lines, I think.
I do too. I mean, I also realized if I'm working with bridges, from moving from one thing to another, lines are going to get real fuzzy as I cross or as these things meet, but they're not wholly themselves. In some places, there's some of both. I think I think sometimes, are we too analytical about this stuff? I kind of envy what I imagined shamans used to be when they just were what they were, and they didn't try to explain it. But the thing about explaining it is, then I think we end up with some common ground. Like you and I use the term aspecting. Mm-hmm. There's about 5 paragraphs to explain what that word means. If you don't mess with it, it's useful to be able to talk to each other about these things. For one thing, I mean, if something is coming, more people getting familiar with some of the things that may help that transpire is good. And the ways we talk about these things, I do think, can help us get there. The women that I mentor, we talk about these things. We talk about, and having a shared language around it is useful. And at some point where mystery is present, you got to leave it behind because it'll hold you back.
Right. Right. Well, and I think of it as shorthand. So like it's helpful to have it, and it sort of points the direction, but it doesn't lead you there.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent way to look at it. That it's experiential, mm-hmm. And so unless you experience it, all the talk in the world won't. We talk about moving energy. If you've been in a ritual or in a place where energy was moved, and most people, I think you can probably bring up, meetings at work in which in some way energy was moved. All good speakers know how to do it, even if they don't know what they're doing. But if you haven't, you can talk about it all day long, but unless you experience energy moving, it's never going to make sense. And then it's going to make sense in a way beyond what words can do.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I guess we should explain aspecting really quick, because probably not everybody listening knows what it is. Just briefly, because that's not fair.
Well, no, not if you want to communicate now.
But I would define aspecting as when you invite, I would say, deity to come through your words or actions so that you can, like in a ritual setting, is so that you can help bring an energy into a group in a more concrete way.
I would
put it a different way.
I would add it's so that everyone can have a shared experience of the sacred in a sacred energy, being the energy of the deity. And I'm also, the reclaiming folks, for some people, acting is enough. Just representing that without any loss of true self is aspecting. Most of the people I know who aspect, there is something of a loss of self that is replaced with the energy of the other. And with the purpose of experiencing the sacred in a way that has a body, you know, because they're walking around in your body, and they can talk, they can touch, so that it's to me it's a more direct experience of them, not just in a vision or in your mind, but in a physical form.
Yep, I like that. So I guess my next question is about, like, what's the point? And I feel like I have an answer for that myself, but I'm curious about your answer. Like in your hypnosis website, you talked about, I'm going to quote you here, the altered state of awareness we call hypnosis is safe and relaxing. I will invite you into a state of deep relaxation to slow down the self-critical part of your mind and access the part of your mind that helps you make the changes you want to make. Anyone who wants to be hypnotized can be. You are always conscious and able to make choices. So I'm saying this in a slightly tongue-in-cheek way, but are you saying that the conscious mind is not the most powerful part of a person? Or don't you delineate it that way?
I think I would answer it both ways. I would say I like when I came across Reclaiming's concept of the triple soul, or that's not Reclaiming actually. I think that's Thorn Coyle, based on the path she follows, is where I came across the concept of the triple soul. And I'm not really sure who I should credit with that. So I'll just mention Reclaiming and Thorn Coyle and just say that the concept was really useful to me. That is when I started realizing it was wrong to leave my body behind when I went into trance, that I wanted to bring my body with me, because we have the part that is on this plane and the part that is on the other plane, and it is our job, I think, to merge those two, to bring the magic back from beyond onto this plane. I think we also give a gift beyond when we take this plane over there. So I'm talking about planes now, but one of the ways you can define those is the conscious and the subconscious.
Right.
And you asked if I thought the subconscious was more powerful. I guess I would say it's less known and understood, so it seems more powerful. We know how we function on this plane. We know how our bodies move. We know what changes we can affect. We know how to do that often. The subconscious is much more mystery. I guess if we were brought up maybe in a shamanic culture, we would understand it. I guess, no, it's always going to be mysterious, but powerful. Okay, so we're powerful on this plane, and I think it helps us be way more powerful on this plane. But I think it lives in the other plane. And so there's a certain amount of mystery to it. I don't know, what is power? So, okay, we built the pyramids. I don't
power,
think
ability to affect change?
To affect change?
The ability to affect change, perhaps?
I think the ability to affect personal change, yes, I think it's way more powerful. But that's just my opinion. We could probably argue about that for a few hours, and I might change my mind. But that's
I don't know
where
if we
I am
need to
at the moment.
argue about it, but I'd love to hear about it, what you think.
Okay. Well, I mean, if someone told me, no, that's wrong, I'm willing to hear that, and they could be right. I'm not real sure. It feels more powerful to me because we don't understand it, and things happen, and we can't explain why. Well, that seems powerful. That seems downright magical. But you said power with the definition of to affect change. You know, with our bodies and our linear mind, we built pyramids. That's powerful. That's change. But I think it's more easily understood, more easily. You can follow the progression of how that all came about more easily. Whereas with the subconscious, sometimes suddenly everything is different. We can't say how that happened.
When we create personal change in ourselves, we can't necessarily explain the process, is what you're saying.
Well, we're learning more and more, and we can explain some of it. And I think I would be sad if we could explain it all. But that could just be my romanticism. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I liked what you said about how when you are in concert with the subconscious mind or with other planes of awareness, that it makes your day-to-day life more powerful, like your physical acting in the world self. So it seems to me like the answer isn't really one or the other, it's the concert between the two. And maybe nothing happens without both.
Well, yes, I would definitely agree with that. If I stay in a trance state all the time, nothing changes in the world. I change, but I'm not acting in the world, and so nothing changes. I would never want to say what the use of the subconscious and trance states are, as though it could be limited. I don't believe it can. But for me, I had to accept at some point I was born into a human body for a reason. I was human, and the human process is to make mistakes. And that trance and that kind of work helps me make the changes that I think get me to my higher self, my authentic self. I make the choices about, this is keeping me from that. I want to change that. And trance and hypnotism will help me do that. And then I'm more effective in this world. And my goal, if we're talking about what's coming and what people do to support that, some people may go beyond the veil and stay there. I don't know. But I think my job is to work over here, but to have access over there and to help other people have access over there. Do you know what I mean?
I know totally what you mean. That's how I feel as well. Because I do know people who believe that they're entering the other side and they're not intending to have physical actions on this side. Or a presence even necessarily. Which part of me understands and part of me doesn't. So that's well into the mystery side of things for me. But I know for myself, I very much feel that I am supposed to be here and I am supposed to be doing work in the world. And for me, the work is about, right now it's about holding space for transformation into a more holistic way of living that involves community and localization and a deeper understanding of personal gifts and a way of living that's outside of cultural norms. So for me, it has to come into the physical. It has to come into the structures of how we choose to live our lives. And that's me personally, my personal journey.
Yeah. For me also, how we treat each other, how we live with each other, and inspire and learn from each other, how we let go of everything that holds that back.
Right.
And live in a place without those things, even though from the time most of us were very small, I think we were taught those were the only ways.
Right.
And I sense it's very much going to require me to have absolute trust that whatever is unfolding the way it should. I think part of me, I get the sense that part of me is likely to doubt and resist and say, oh, this is too much, this is too violent, this is violent meaning huge change or mountains falling into the ocean, I don't know. And I get the sense that my big challenge will be to just have faith and see it through. Kind of like when a woman is giving birth and you think, this is too much, I don't see how either she or the baby will make it, that I'll just have to have faith.
Well, it seems like there's a moment of that in every transformation. And birth is one of them. There's that between, 7 and 10 centimeters that the woman herself thinks it's just, this isn't going to happen, I'm going to die. It's just, I can't do this. And the hormones are partly telling her that, but that's what pretty much every woman feels at that point, especially if she's unmedicated. And I'm not saying being unmedicated is a bad thing, but that's a whole different discussion. But I also feel like there's a big point of power right there, too. That's where you get your power, when you give up on clinging to your idea of what it should feel like or be like. When you just sort of give up, but you're still there doing it.
Yeah, I like that. I hadn't thought of that. Change can be more gentle, but it's not as, certainly, I don't think it's usually as permeating and as dynamic as that kind of change. When you come up against that wall and then you push through because you really just don't have any choice. It kind of reminds me of the story of Carolyn, chasing Merlin around the fire, because he dipped his finger in the magical potion that gave him all insight, and he could change into anything, and she's chasing him, and unless he transforms, she will catch him and he will die. So he transforms again and again and again and again, kind of like the Tam Lin story where he transforms again and again, changing his shape.
Yeah.
But it only happened because she was chasing him and going to destroy him. And it when I think about the change that I feel like is coming, it does feel kind of like that to me. My instinct, it seems to me it will be that way.
So do you feel like this discussion, as far as the changes that are coming and even birth, do you feel like that has a parallel with the death work?
Oh, yeah. That's why I love death work. One of the things, I strongly believe that pagan women are just made to do death work, which is not to say others are not, but we are comfortable in sacred space. Mm-hmm. And my experience walking into rooms where someone is dying is that people don't know sacred space and don't know how to move in it. Don't know, the air is heavy. It kind of freaks them out. And so pagan women, most of the pagan women I know move in sacred space in ritual and other times, and we're comfortable there. And just being comfortable there changes everything. Sometimes I just think breathing and not being afraid shows everyone else in the room, they're feeling sacred space. Of course, I don't call it that because they don't always have that language, but they're feeling it, and if you can be in this space and breathe and not be afraid, then so much falls into place. They just need a way to know that, and pagan women know that thing. And so then you can turn to what's happening instead of your fears about what's happening. They can, and everyone does, and then it becomes just wonderful in so many ways. Which is not to say, I think death is wonderful, but it's like birth. It's wonderful and terrible, and it is what it is, and we can only swim in that water. We're thrown in that water, and we got to swim in it. And that if we're dying, that means we die, and if not, it means we learn to be with the person who is, and in the space of dying. So, yeah, I also think it's very good training for any kind of change.
Yeah.
It teaches you what you can and cannot do, and when to just accept what you cannot do and breathe through it, and be with each other in it, because it's very comforting to be with each other in it. Not for everyone, but often it is. And you'll see that, and the way people will say, they'll come back from like a family funeral and talk about how wonderful it was to be with everybody, and they, usually we don't really expect that. I think we expect it to only be bad and painful. And it's like it's a great deal of both. Part of what makes it hard is the envelope is so wide that our emotions are just all over the place, which is another reason to just breathe. So yeah, I think it's very much like that, and you can conceptualize, and to some extent, trance and hypnotism they're certainly much more conceptual. You create, you imagine things, and so your limitations are in there. They certainly stretch your limitations, but still you're limited by who and what you are. An experience that is more shamanic or more or death in which you don't have all the control, it's very, a lot of things change.
Yeah. You said a lot of beautiful stuff in there. And I feel like all of that totally applies to what's going on. Like ways that people can think about the changes that are happening right now and how to sit there in that space, as you said. Like learn how to be in that space and breathe and just accept what you can and cannot do.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of those things are extremely useful. And I don't think you have to be pagan to learn it either. And I'm not saying that you said that you would have to, but I mean that practice can be helpful, but anybody can learn how to sit in space, in a heavy space, and just sit with it and experience it and not fight it.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of paths, or just a lot of, I mean, some people just know how to naturally. I envy them. I think Buddhism does a lot to help teach that.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I said, some people just have an instinct for it, to be still and accepting. I had to work very hard at it.
At what point did you start doing that? What point in your life?
Did I start doing what?
Learning how to do that, to sit in that space.
Well, you know, so I could say the easy answer would be when I started working with trance and death. But, you know, I mean, all of us bring what we bring to it. I fought it so hard because, you know, my upbringing was such that you'd better fight, you'd better try to organize chaos, or chaos will ensue and there will be danger and stuff. And so I learned to try to shape chaos. I learned to try to manage it, to try to head it off. A lot of the pagan women I know have such good instincts because they grew up in places where it saved them. You know, they had to develop it. They had to know when danger was about. And they're good at it now because they've had practice. So my instinct was, and it still is sometimes more than I wish, to push back and to try to miss places where the goddess knows what she's doing and I need to step away. I see it better all the time. I'm still not as good at it as I would like to be. So I don't know when I started learning it. I know I reached a point when what I was doing wasn't working anymore. And I had to either stop growing or I had to learn another way to do it. And surrender taught me, surrender was really helpful. When I can remember to do it, it's really helpful. Or when I can keep myself from fighting against it.
Yeah,
and death work and trance were both helpful with that.
Those habits are so hard to break, for sure.
So, well, yeah, you know, when I went into hypnotism, to being a hypnotherapist, I was surprised at what I found my work was. And what I found my work was often is that my clients came to me doing things because they just didn't realize they were making a choice. They didn't realize there was another choice. And hypnotism is really useful there because you talk about what that other choice might look like and you follow where it might end and you get a sense of it so that the next time they're at a place where they were making a choice without knowing they were, now they really can conceive of another choice. And they may make the same old choice, but at least they know that that's what they're doing. And so, I didn't, and I think many of us didn't know, I didn't know I was making a choice for the longest time. I didn't know there was any other way other than to push back, fight back, try to shape things into the way I thought they should be. And then at some point, and I would hear, you go through that awful period where you hear people talking about, well, you just need to have faith, and the goddess has a plan here, and you need to trust that she knows better than you. And I'd be thinking, what baloney? That is just pablum. Don't tell me that. We need to be doing something here. We need to be, but it was true. And so now the challenge is to figure out which choice I want to make, which choice is good. Because, sometimes we do need to take action. We do need to do things. Mm-hmm. We have physical bodies on this plane. And we were put here to do that, I think. I think I was put here to do that. But I try to be aware that I'm more likely to choose action wrongly than I am inaction.
Well, it's interesting because we're in an odd time in history because, when you talk about the shamanistic cultures or the indigenous cultures or, any of that kind of thing, you're talking about people that's how they came into being that way. Like, they didn't start from a technologically, quote unquote, like situation that we're in where we're destroying the planet and everybody's out of harmony and there's a lot of illness and division and isolation. They didn't go from that into harmony. They kind of started with harmony. So we're in an interesting time right now because a lot of people are sensing that it's time to go back to that. But we're all still dealing with the cultural conditioning and the family conditioning that's a microcosm of the overall destructive culture. And so we have to learn an entirely new way of interacting and being. And so it's an interesting little puzzle or challenge. Yeah.
So there were a lot of aspects to what you just said. I would suggest that indigenous peoples didn't always live in total harmony because they were human. They are human, and we are sometimes disharmonious. But they certainly, I think, had a good pattern and a better fallback position than our culture has given us in many ways, in my opinion.
Right, and I'm idealizing it, and as you say that, I realize, like, oh yeah, I shouldn't do that.
Well, I didn't mean you shouldn't do that.
What's that?
I wasn't trying to imply you shouldn't.
No. I was just thinking that, like, oh, okay. I noticed that.
When I started, I'm in a study group that used Angeles Arian's Fourfold Way. We took it as our study book for a year, and it was so rich we ended up taking it for 2 years. And when I started it, and she said we were going to be studying based on the beliefs of indigenous peoples, I really was kind of turned off, and I thought, oh, all right, we're going to, as if we could go back to that, as if we could drum and live the way they did. I mean, that's just not who we are. But, oh my gosh, it was so rich. It was so, it just knocked my socks off over and over. Huge revelations. I remember when she talked about the addiction to drama. That just completely changed my life, that concept that people could be addicted to drama and what that could do. So,
could you tell me more about that, or do you want to finish your point first?
Well, I was in a study group of about 10 women studying this, and so different things hit different ones of us. Uh-huh. But because people are different, but it was I was really ashamed at how I had not seen how useful this stuff was until I read what she wrote. But I realized I should have been looking into this a long time ago, and I had kind of a prejudice against it, I think, and so I hear you saying that you see the change that's coming as returning us. Well, as the people possibly who make it through know something of those things and have them as a resource, and that perhaps our life is moving afterwards to a place where that is more at the heart of it. Is that what you think?
Say that again?
I think I heard you saying that kind of harmonious approach to life that is kind of evident in some of the paths of the indigenous peoples, that you think that's where we're headed, that you think that's what this change may deliver to us.
Well, yes and no. Because I see all evolution as a spiral. So I see it coming to that point around on the spiral of more harmonious living, but not in the same way necessarily, because we'll still take everything that we learned with us. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
So not a return to the old, but bringing back of the old and merging it with what we've learned now and discarding what's not working for us right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's this addiction to drama business concept?
Let's see. I always thought a lot of what I brought to ritual and to life was intense passion. People who were afraid of passion could live it through me because I wasn't afraid of it, and I was proud of that, and I embraced that as an essential part of who I was. That I would throw myself into a fight. I would passionately fight for what I believed. I would feel things deeply at both ends of the scale, both ecstasy and despair. It felt like that was, to me, like that was what it meant to be alive. It felt like that was what I should be striving to do. And somewhere along the way, I don't know where, I think I just saw some of the results of that. And also, I just wore myself out, you know. I'm 60 now. I mean, that kind of thing wears you out. It's burning the candle at both ends, kind of. And I just began to appreciate the concept of peace and peace of mind and stillness. I didn't have much of that in my life. And I guess what I'm saying is I was unbalanced with it. I still, you know, I'm in ecstatic groups. I mean, I like ecstasy, but I needed more stillness. I needed more balance around the other end of the spectrum. And when she said addiction to drama, it just kind of hit me in between the eyes that I was kind of defining my life based on how dramatic everything was and assuming that was a good thing. Now, not dramatic like, oh, let's stir up trouble because we need some drama, but I was just putting out an awful lot of energy in intensity, and I made the decision to back away from that. And really, I had already done that. It's just that when she said that, I knew why I had done that. And when what surprised me was, I thought, okay, I want less drama in my life. I'm going to be less dramatic. And I thought there would be less drama in my life, but I didn't realize often other people bring it. And so then I had to get some dramatic people out of my life. And then things went much more, you know, it's difficult to trance when there's a whole lot of this going on. And I found myself more and more drawn to that stillness and that quiet and that silence. And to get there, I had to give some things up. But I think it was just really all about balance. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I saw a little unfortunate piece of reflection in there, but of self-reflection of myself. But it's good. It's good. It's all a process. So.
Yeah.
But I think I've started to break away from that as well. I think it's less me than it was a year ago. So that's good too. If you don't mind, I would like to talk a little bit more about the death work specifically. I'm curious on your perceptions of what changes when a person faces death, either symbolic deaths in their life or someone else's death. Does it change how you look at everything?
You're asking me if the death of a piece of your life or your actual physical death changes how you look at things?
Well, I guess I mean, how does it?
How does it?
Yeah, that's a better question.
Let's see. Okay, I'm going to go first with something as a piece of your life dying.
Okay.
In both ritual and in the clients that come to me, in the clients that come to me for hypnosis, I have learned to lay groundwork for being okay with change. you can want the best change in the world. I mean, there's just no question you're gonna quit smoking, for example. I mean, very few people would argue that the upside of smoking exceeds the downside of smoking. So we don't, the client comes in, they want to, and that's a simple one. I really enjoy the clients that come to me that have deep spiritual stuff going on, and we work with that. But the point is, even when it's very positive, there feels like a big downside. And the bigger the change, the bigger the downside. It's like a part of you has died. And that feels very uncomfortable. And you have to have a certain amount of faith most times, not everyone, but many people have to have a certain amount of faith that you are going to be whole again. That this is change, that this is what change looks like. It's not that you're doing it wrong. It's not that you shouldn't have tried to give this thing up. It's just that this is how it looks. It feels like you've lost an arm. You're not comfortable. You don't feel like you can just be anywhere and just be yourself. It's like an effort all the time because this was a big part of what you were. And yes, you wanted it, and yes, you're succeeding at it, so why does it feel so damn bad and scary? So with my clients, we do a lot of work of it's going to feel that way. It may feel that way for a while. It may look that way for a while. Hang with it. It's not that you're doing it wrong. It's that that's the nature of it. And so in any kind of death, you're not going to be yourself anymore, and you can't conceive of what you are going to be. The bigger the change, the harder it is to conceive of who you're going to be. And so there's a sense of loss of self. And, when people talk about dying, what they fear is that they will cease to exist. If they could believe, or if they were certain they were going to exist in some other form, that wouldn't be so bad. They're afraid they're not going to exist at all. And that may be true. We don't know. I know what I believe, but we don't know. So that's one of the big things around it all. And when you're looking for someone to help you through that process, it's really good to have someone that believes in you and can tell you you're going to come through this, and it's going to be good, and this is part of the work. So just be okay with being damned uncomfortable for a while. And, of course, if they're physically dying, that's increased, 1,000,000 times. Because I can't sit there and tell them I know where they're going and I know what's going to happen. It wouldn't have any meaning anyway.
Right.
It's what they believe about it, or don't believe, or don't know. I mean, it takes the shape it takes for them, and they don't completely change. They are still who they are, and their death reflects who they've always been. Things change. I mean, the usual things change. You realize the things that you thought were important tomorrow are not. I know I have a friend who almost died, and I asked her one time, she made it through it. And I asked her, well, what do you think you'll be doing this time next year? And she said, I don't do that anymore. I'm very aware that any day could be the last day now, and I don't want to forget what that taught me, so I don't ask myself what I'll be doing a year from now. She said that's a fallacy, that's a fiction, and I don't want to go back to that. So things change. Does that answer your question?
That does. That does. I really like the part about that you're still here, like assuming it's a part of your life or part of yourself that's dying, and we're not talking about physical death. Because to me, that seems like one of the biggest gifts of death is that afterwards you realize that, like after you let go of a part of yourself, afterwards you realize, like for me, it's that I get connected to like the eternal part of myself that can't die. And so, and that goes on no matter what difficulties I face or what challenges or what I go through. There's always a part of me that's always there in my very center, and that's very pure. And so it seems to me like one of the gifts that death offers. Any kind of death, potentially. I mean, like cultural death or personal things that are dying in your life.
You get back to essence?
Yeah, back to essence. I like that phrase. Back to essence.
I think that happens too. The unimportant things fall away. Everything becomes, I feel like everyone becomes more Buddhist. And not everyone, but a lot of people become more Buddhist in those situations where there's less attachment. There's a sense of just being in the moment, as though the moment is all that matters.
Mm-hmm.
It can bring home a lot of things that we realize we wish we had known all our lives, or had emphasized more, or fallen back on more.
Right.
And I do think it has beautiful things to offer. It's really, one of the essence things is how we are with each other in it. When the dying person and the one with them can do nothing to change this, or very little, it's going where it's going, then suddenly you're in this kind of vacuumed space where there is nothing but the love you hold for each other and the compassion you hold, or the care. There's nothing to be done, and so it really invites you into a space of just being. And we aren't trained, we're not taught to do that. Or maybe, sometimes I think we're not taught to do it, and sometimes I think it goes against human nature, but I don't want to believe it goes against human nature.
I don't believe that.
I want to believe that our culture just doesn't leave much place for that. When you're focused on acquiring wealth and accumulating things and hiding from yourself, I have so many people say, "Why do you do this stuff? Why don't you just enjoy life?" Actually, I don't have so many people say that, because most of those people aren't in my life anymore.
Right.
But I don't mean, I say that like, oh, I've gotten rid of all the, the stuff hanging on. I don't mean that at all. It's just that's not helpful to me. I can't be myself with people who don't understand that. It's a lot of who I am. We're just never going to find any common ground where we can share much.
Right.
But I don't know. There is maybe, because I'm going back to the addiction to drama thing. I'm hoping this isn't just. It's intense. It's intense to follow these paths and to do these things, and at the same time, maybe that's why we kind of naturally turn to stillness more to balance that out. I don't know.
Well, for me, it's interesting to think about not being able to find common ground and everything after, when this is your way of connecting with life. When I was growing up, I actually spent a lot of time with people who were dying. A lot of time. My father was a minister, and he would take me to go visit people who were dying, and I would pray with them and sit with them. And also had a couple relatives that I sat with for hours and hours at a time as they died. And I was really comfortable with it. It didn't scare me. It didn't freak me out. I was totally comfortable. And I understood how to move, and I understood how to talk, and I don't know, it just came really easy to me. And I think that that's part of why I've never fit in. I've never been able to be comfortable in any kind of acceptable situation, acceptable way of living. I can't live the norms because they seem so empty and hollow to me. And I think that's part of why.
Yeah. It changes you.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, in what's to come, it may be that is the norm. And I don't know. I'm hoping it's okay to hope that that's true.
Well, I hope that that's true, because death is part of life, so it's not something to be scared of.
Well, I don't. I just, for myself, I want to be careful not to be careful about when I'm making choices about this. Is this just what it means to be human? Is it just human to fear death? And there will always be some who do less. But if it's just human to fear death, I don't want to throw out, you shouldn't fear death. I know you shouldn't. That's wrong. I'm not that certain. And I don't want to close, and I know you're not saying we should close that door.
Right.
For myself, a world or a community, the community I live in, the culture I live in, that didn't fear death in the way they do, would be such a blessing. And I do believe it would bless them too. And I just don't want us to turn our back. I mean, I guess I don't trust my judgment on this. I want to leave the door open to where we go, you are welcome here too. And
right.
If you fear death, we will make a place. There's a place here for you. I won't. Do you know what I'm saying?
I hear what you're saying. I think the part that summed it up best was you don't want to close a door.
I don't.
You don't want to close a door to anybody that doesn't feel this way.
Yeah, I guess.
And that's a good thing. It's a good thing not to close the door.
Even if it is a place that it would be good for them to reach, I don't want to close the door to them getting there by saying, well, if you're not already there, there's no place for you here.
Well, I don't think we can have that attitude, period, towards anything. Because we're all living in a toxic culture and we're all trying to find our way out. Or not everybody's trying to find their way out, but even amongst those of us that are trying to find a way out of living in toxicity, it's a process. So I don't think we should ever judge anybody for anywhere that they are in the process.
Oh, pardon me. There's somebody at my door and my dog went nuts. I'll go to a different room.
And plus, judging people just puts a hard spot in our heart. You know what I mean? Like, we can choose not to do something the way that somebody else does, but there's no reason to judge.
Yeah. And at the same time, I seek out communities that are spiritual and positive and about growth and change. And so, you know, if you drop me down in the middle of a culture that had all the worst characteristics of our current culture, I don't know that I could claim I would be non-judgmental. I would like to be, but I guess I hope the change that's coming would come out on the other side of it with a lot more potential for what's more positive, just like you were saying.
I think that sounds like a good vision.
Yeah.
So we just have a little bit of time left. Was there anything else you feel called to say?
Ooh.
And don't worry about the time too much. It's kind of arbitrary a little bit.
Only that everything I have said is what I have found kind of is true for me at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think, I'm trying to think back, I don't think much of what I said at all represents my opinion about what I think people should be. I just, it's all filtered through my experience and my stuff and doing the best I can to figure out things. But I'm always open for other opinions and for other ways of coming at it.
Yeah. I feel like that came across.
Good.
And I'm kind of, I agree with that as well. Like, I feel that over the time of the show, my opinions are going to change about a number of things. And so I sort of feel like I'm living the question. And I think that's the best anybody can do.
Yeah. I for myself, I really distrust being certain about much of anything. I'm afraid I'll miss something unless I really stay open about everything, really. But at the same time, there's some things that you got to know some things you can't move forward. So I do allow myself to feel like I know some things. But those are all open for change. Like I said, I used to think I was all about passion, and I've kind of changed my mind there. So do you feel like what we talked about fits the format of your new show?
Oh, totally. I feel like it practically described the show.
Good. I'd like to hear more about your childhood and visiting the dying sometime.
Absolutely. We should talk.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so thank you so much for coming on the show.
Sure. Thank you for asking me.
No problem. And we've been talking with Sisalfish. Sisal is a death worker, trance facilitator, and hypnotist. And we have, did you want to say any of your websites quick before we go?
Sure. It's DeniseLeeHypnosis.com. DeniseLee hypnosis.com.
Great. And next we're going to be talking with Carolyn Elliott, and she wrote the book Awesome Your Life, which is comes at a nice jumping off point from this conversation. They have some interesting connections between these two topics. And if anybody wants to connect to the show, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and of course we have a website and an email address, and I can give all of that information at the end of the second hour. So we're going to listen to music for a minute while I call Carolyn and get that all set up. Thank you again, Sisal, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Blessings. are back.
We are back.
And we are back with Carolyn Elliott. How are you doing today, Carolyn?
Oh, I am wonderful.
Very good. So, Carolyn wrote the book Awesome Your Life, and she has a website also called awesomeyourlife.com. I guess I'd like to start today. Would you mind telling me about your personal journey? How you got to the point of writing a book called Awesome Your Life? Title possibly changing soon.
Sure, yeah, I would love to. Yeah, so that's a good point. The title of the book, the publisher, I had self-published it previously, and now the publisher wants it to change, so it might be called The Soulmaker's Handbook, or The Handbook to Soulmaking, or something like that. Now, I'll talk a little bit about what soulmaking is at some point. But yeah, my journey was that I was very miserable in my late teens and early 20s. I got into really yucky drugs and hanging around with people who were bad for me. And the reason why I was doing that was because along the way growing up, I'd encountered some abusive situations, and I had come to believe things about myself that were pretty sad. I didn't have, I guess you could say, like, love for myself. So I went through this process of getting addicted to drugs. Actually, I was addicted to heroin and cocaine, which is a pretty ugly pair of things. Mm-hmm. But even in my active addiction and even in my involvement with kind of shady folks, I felt a really deep spiritual calling. And that spiritual calling, in the sense that what I was doing just was not right and not good, led me to seek recovery. So I got into 12-step recovery, and it saved my life. I'm still in it today. And so I got clean, and that was great, and I got a lot of help and spiritual support. But I realized that I still had so many questions and so many issues that needed to be addressed at even deeper levels than I was being helped with. So I launched this pretty intensive search through the annals of psychology and philosophy, got really deep into reading Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, Kierkegaard, Heidegger, Nietzsche, sort of the list goes on and on, Whitman, Emerson. I was in grad school at the time, so for English, so that facilitated all of this intense reading. And I began to piece together a sense of how to practice principles and how to structure my meditative work and my reflective work and my artistic work in such a way that it would lead me to an objective that I thought was truly worthwhile. And for me, that objective is the creation of heaven on earth, which I also sometimes call the gift world. Charles Eisenstein, who's the author of Sacred Economics, which is one of my very favorite books, likes to call it the more beautiful world that our hearts tell us is possible. So I put together Awesome Your Life. It's sort of a funny, playful title to explain to other people how to do this work that I'd sort of assimilated from all these kind of intense sources, and to make it accessible and to make it fun. And I've been eager to share it because those processes have done so much in my own life to move me from a place where I was very miserable, very afraid, to where my life is very full and rich with love.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So briefly, you wanted to talk about the fact the title's changing, and then we'll dig a little bit more into everything you talked about.
Yeah, well, right. So the title, which might involve something about soul making, I wanted to say that's a pretty funny term in itself. And for everybody listening out there, the notion of soul making is a very old one. It goes back to the ancient Greeks, to Plato, who in the symposium talked about a process that he called poesis. And poesis, obviously, that's the root of our word for poetry, but it doesn't just mean poetry in the sense that we're used to. It literally means making. So poesis in ancient Greek is any deep process of making. But Plato used it specifically to refer to the process of making the soul through the practice of virtue and the cultivation of virtue. So the poet John Keats in the 19th century kind of took up this idea again and began playing with it. And he was the first one to coin this English term, soul making. And Keats said something very interesting in a letter to his brother. He said, "So many people think that this world is a vale of tears, that it's just all about suffering and sorrow. And what I really want everyone to know is that this world is actually a vale of soul making. It's a place where we each have the opportunity to make our souls by learning to read the world through the heart's hornbook." Of course, which is all a sort of flowery way of saying we make our souls by learning to see the world with love, and even to see things that and people that challenge us very intensely through the eyes of love. So my book is about that.
And with the title being changed, you're getting published.
Mm-hmm.
So that's exciting news. Right now it's on Kindle, so it's kind of published already.
Well, that's a good point. Actually, I just had to take it down from Kindle because I just signed the contract with North Atlantic. So it's actually technically unavailable right now. Although, if you go searching around through the archives of my website, you can find some of the essays that the book wound up being based on. But the actual book itself will be out in a beautiful, fancy ebook edition and hard paperback edition in the fall of 2013. So that's what's up.
Ah. I did not know that they were taking it off of Kindle.
Yeah, sadly. Well, I had self-published it on Kindle in November, I think. So yeah, it'll be back though.
Okay. Well, that's cool. We'll go ahead and talk about it then, and then people will find a way to get a hold of it when it comes out.
Yeah.
Okay, so going backwards just a little bit, you talked about you had a tough childhood, and then you got into addiction, and then you joined 12-step program, and that wasn't quite everything you were hoping it could be, and then you found your own way to healing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sorry. I guess I just should say the 12-step program was everything that I hoped that it could be, and that it's kept me clean. So that's a whole lot.
Right.
But yes, I did. Yeah, I'm sorry.
You were wanting more from your life.
Yes.
Than that. Yeah. Well, it's a little bit similar to my story, which is up on the website if anybody wants to read it, but it's like I had to find my own way in some ways as well. Like I did the same search through different psychological sources and methods, and then also had to sort of put together a lot of different things that I came across using discernment, looking into things and saying, okay, does this feel right? Does this work? And then putting them together. So it's neat that you got it to this point, though, because like when I read the book, and I haven't read the whole thing yet because I am going to do the process that's within it, when I read it, it's kind of amazing how much stuff is packed in there.
Yeah, thank you. That's something that a good number of people who've read it have told me, that I initially designed it to be sort of like one chapter a week, kind of like The Artist's Way is set up, that great classic from Julia Cameron. And my initial readers told me, Carolyn, it's impossible to digest this in just 1 week, live the rest of our lives. And I was like, oh, okay, I can see how that's true. Since Lord knows it's taken me, much longer than 7 or 8 weeks to do these processes in my own life. But yes, I guess I'm a little bit, my writing style is maybe perhaps inescapably dense, and that might be what long years of academia have done to me. But
no, I don't
I
mean
hope
it in that way, because it's not dry.
Okay.
Academia is dry. I'm just saying, like, you read a paragraph and then you want to sit and meditate about it for an hour, like before you go on to the concept in the next paragraph. Like, it's not dry at all. It's very light reading. It's just that you really get to the point. It's like almost poetic. I mean, it's prose. It is prose, but it's almost poetic because it just, I don't know if you always, I don't know if you write naturally this way, but it seems like you play a lot with meter and that sort of thing, so that it reads so easy, but then all of a sudden you're grasping something that you didn't grasp before. And so you do need a moment. Like, you can't read 400 poems at once and not sit and think about them. You need time between poems too.
Well, Epiphany, what you're saying right now is deeply warming my heart, because that is the intended effect. And I am a poet. I've written a few books of poetry, and I taught poetry for many years at the University of Pittsburgh. And so it's true that I have thought a lot about the rhythms of language and the ways in which words can be deployed to create certain kinds of realizations. So it's really beautiful for me to hear that not just the sort of ideas of the book, but also the way that they're presented are, I guess, worthy of attracting your contemplation.
Sorry, that's just a cute way to say that. Oh boy. But yeah, so this book, The Soul Making, when I first started skimming the book, I was like, okay, yeah, that's nice. That sounds good. And it's interesting, like this show, I did have a show before, and it was called Systemic Effect. And it changed me in the year and some time that I did it. Like, each conversation that I had with somebody changed me, also in the researching of the interviews. Like, my ideas were challenged, myself was challenged. And I kind of figured it would happen the same way with this show, but it started off a lot more intense than I thought it would be. Because I scheduled you because I was interested in your personal inquiry work, and we can talk about that in a little bit, but like the coaching that you do with people. I've seen you post things about it. I thought it was really interesting. And I had skimmed your website a little bit, and I was just like, this is an awesome person. I'd totally love to have her on the show. And then you said yes. So then I was, getting ready for the show, and I happened to have access to a way to read Kindle stuff. And so I downloaded your book, and I started reading it, and I was like, oh. And I had to sort of take a deep breath and think, okay, this is, I wasn't even really ready for this yet. I felt like it wasn't quite the direction that I was picturing the show going. I was picturing it being a little bit more academic, a little bit more, like a little bit more of the activism mix of the spiritual activism, like more the activism side of things, and sort of more quote unquote respectable. And so then this was the first topic of the show, and I thought, oh crap. No offense, but I thought, oh crap, because, I'm like, okay, this is stuff I totally believe. Like, everything I'm seeing in this book is stuff that I either believe, or now that I've read it, I believe. So I kind of have to go with it, and be authentic. And then ironically, of course, that's half the theme of the book, is being authentic. So it's totally challenged me, like, because it was in, a week or two's time, I've had to take a very sharp right turn on what I felt in my heart the show was about, and what my role on the show was. Interestingly, the description I wrote still fit, so I was onto something when I wrote the description, but but it's intense, and I've decided to do the challenge in your book, the 7-week thing program, and it's very interesting. I feel like it's exactly what I needed. And And I wasn't expecting to engage that much with the material for, something from my first interview for the show. So it's a really interesting journey that it's put me on, which also means that the show is going to be slightly more about me than I thought it was, because I'm going to, because as I just did, I talked about myself. So, so I'm going to do the 7-week program, and then Carolyn has agreed to come back on the show on September 16th, and we'll talk about all of this some more.
Oh boy, I can't wait. That's going to be so fun.
It's going to be exciting. So let's talk about the challenges in the book. There's the joy giving, there's the commonplace journal, and then like the experiments and the reading. Mm-hmm. Right. So talk about joy giving to start with, please.
Sure. Yeah. So joy gifting is a meditation that it's a version of loving kindness meditation. So traditional Buddhist loving kindness meditation is mostly verbal. So you do it by saying to first a loved one, then a neutral person, then an enemy, then yourself, the words, may you be free from all suffering, may you be happy and have all the causes of happiness. And you just sort of send that out mostly verbally. Joy gifting is a bit of a turbocharged version of that, which I find kind of works better with my system. And by that I mean my nervous system and with many other people's. And what it entails is vividly imagining first a friend, and then a neutral person, and then somebody you're kind of annoyed with, and then yourself. Imagining all of these people in an amazingly beautiful, wonderful situation, seeing them so happy, so fulfilled, so loved, so surrounded by bounty and wonder, just the max of that. And what I found as I explored this mode of meditation was that it made me really, really happy and really, really energized and a lot more loving and kind and less afraid in my daily interactions with people. And I'm not exactly sure how to explain how I used to be before all this, but I was really, let's say I was squirrely. I was kind of avoidant and bitchy sometimes, and just generally not okay with myself. And this process of joy gifting is one of the major things that allowed me to cultivate an abundance of love and energy in my life, which is really the foundation of everything else that I do spiritually and that I describe in the rest of the book. Because without that love energy, it's kind of impossible to take the risks that the other exercises, the other chapters ask. And without that love energy, it's impossible for me to have enough attention and willingness to keep a commonplace book and to cultivate my creativity through that.
Right. One thing I really liked that you said was that it makes you less scared in your day-to-day life. Because I think sometimes one of the things that makes me sometimes not want to describe myself as spiritual is that sometimes I see your spirituality used as an excuse to not engage with the world. If that makes sense. So then this to me seems like a really authentic, not that you can say what's authentic or not for other people, but it makes sense to me because it is about engaging with life, but having the tools to do so in a way that feels good.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's very crucial to me. So something that I feel, I guess, compelled to really emphasize when I talk about the work of bringing heaven on earth into manifestation is that, like, I really hear what you mean, Epiphany. I've read a lot of like spiritual books that just emphasize inner work, and I've read a lot of books on creativity that just emphasize, you know, the importance of art and the importance of like getting an audience or admiration for one's artwork. And to me, those things seem, you know, nice, but actually kind of irrelevant to the great demand of our age, which is that we have a whole giant society that is cannibalizing itself. You know, cannibalizing the earth, cannibalizing the energy of us, its participants, and just so much destructive stuff happening. And well, I guess you could say I'm a transcendentalist in that I believe that everything that I see in the outside world is actually part of something which is a large dream or a holograph that, you know, and it's not me, individual Carolyn, who's the dreamer of the dream. It's rather, I guess you could say, some sort of divinity that's dreaming this dream. But it is me, Carolyn, who is creating, well, part of the projection that I see. Sort of gets tricky explaining this because it's a collaborative hologram that I believe that we're seeing. But I do have a large role in creating the world that I see around me through the beliefs that I'm holding and through the actions and energies that I'm sending out based on those beliefs. And by what I mean by that at a sort of simple level, although I think you could take it pretty deep, pretty far metaphysically, is that I can create a loving world around me, or a really harsh and critical world. And in an elementary way, I can do that by, how do I say, if I'm really rejecting and harsh and, you know, I'm afraid of everybody, and so I treat everybody sort of in a not so great way just because they scare me, so I don't feel like I have the energy to be, you know, super kind and welcoming to them. People feel that, everybody around me feels that I'm sending out these vibes of self-centeredness or stinginess or criticism, and they respond to me then in a way that is itself kind of, how do I say, they don't like me, generally. The world, you know, everyone loves a lover, and nobody has great affection for somebody who's full of selfishness and fear unless they themselves are just so affectionate that they're really grounded and able to give extra love to people who are selfish and fearful, which is ultimately the goal. Wait, I think I may not be making sense right now.
No, I think you are. You're
okay.
I feel like what you're saying, you're talking about how what you act like in the world brings your energy into the world. You bring that energy into the world through your actions.
Yes, and ultimately, over time, and the more, how do I say this? The more of us as individuals who are living our lives from a place of self-centered fear, and therefore we're, let's say, I mean, this is basically what's gone wrong with the world. A lot of us have been living from self-centered fear, and a lot of us have been hoarding money, hoarding resources, you know, trying to look out for number one and for our own little families and saying like, well, screw the rest of the world. And basically just acting from that fear. And the more of us do this, the more we create a world around us that's kind of yucky and kind of much more difficult than it needs to be. Whereas if the more of us start living from a place of unselfishness and generosity and a kind of surrendered trust and willingness to forgive, accept, the more we can, well, you know, just share our gifts with one another without clenching up, without tightening down, and really experience our underlying oneness and the pleasure of the different manifestations of that oneness.
Right.
So that's a very political kind of work, actually. Like the more that I've started writing another book now, which is kind of religious and kind of political and kind of both. And I think the separation that has been made in many people's minds between, I shouldn't even say religion, between spirituality and politics or, activism is completely completely nonsensical. I've spent a lot of time meditating on the life of somebody who inspires me a lot, and that's Jesus, or I like to call him Queer Jesus. And I like to talk about Queer Jesus because I think when I say I love Jesus and people don't know me too well, they assume that I'm maybe some sort of right-winger who's really interested in teen abstinence and, really wants, I don't even know what. But that's not what I mean. What I mean is I love this long-haired homeless guy who hung out with prostitutes and made wine appear at parties and told everybody not to work or save money.
Right.
That's who I love. I love Queer Jesus. So anyways.
Well, and I'm with you on that boat. I've personally had some really amazing experiences in connection with Jesus, but I do not identify as Christian. Not just because of what people will think that means, but also just because of, I don't believe in the church. But he was a great guy, and he has amazing energy, and I enjoy connecting with him, as well as other deities.
Mm-hmm.
And, archetypes and mythological features or figures and whoever. I feel like you almost touched on it a little bit. Well, you kind of did, but the morphic field is a concept that I've only sort of run into before reading your book, but can you talk about how the morphic field holds that shape?
Oh boy, yes, I would love to. And really quick, I would like to just sort of say that I totally am with you about the not wanting anything to do with the church or institutional Christianity. And I guess I just wanted to finish up that line of thought about the interrelationship of spirituality and politics by mentioning that Jesus was killed by the political authorities in power at the time because his message was radically threatening to all political power, in that it wasn't a message of revolution, or violent revolution rather, but it was a message of love so unconditional that it disrupts the foundations of hierarchic power.
Yes.
So anyways, just to wrap up that point, which
thank you.
is a pet talking point of mine, but about morphic fields, well, I find it very interesting in the writings of many of the Renaissance philosophers, and I'm sure I could find them in classic philosophers too, and also the Romantics and Jung. There's this notion of anima mundi, the soul of the world. And there's actually, it's sort of the thought of the planet as a living being that itself, has memory, has desires, has thoughts, emotions. And so Rupert Sheldrake, who was the gentleman who advanced the theory of morphic fields, and in my opinion, one of the greatest scientific minds ever to exist, he was a very spiritual guy, and he realized that there was an interconnection between this notion of soul and what it was traditionally thought to contain, and an unexplained phenomenon in biology, which is the phenomenon of how do things shape themselves. Because, for example, you take a single cell in your arm and a single cell in your leg, and those cells have the same DNA in them, the same chemical composition as in your arm and in your leg. But somehow the cells in your arm grew into the shape of an arm, and the cells in your leg grew into the shape of a leg. And where did that shape come from exactly? And Sheldrake noticed that scientists, biologists, tended to say, oh, well, that information is somewhere encoded in the DNA, and we just haven't found it yet, but someday we will, and it's there, that's where it is, in the DNA. And Sheldrake was just skeptical about this, and it's been a while since I read his actual work, so I may be summarizing poorly, but he just emphasized that actually it's much more likely that there are fields that surround each living being, and these fields are what kind of contain the knowledge of the shape that each living thing should take. They're electromagnetic, probably, that's what the notion is, and that somehow the information about shape is encoded as it's, how am I going to say, it's non-local information that's contained within these fields. So there's fields that govern individual beings, and then there's fields that govern things that are alike in some way. So, for example, Sheldrake would say there's a morphic field that governs monkeys. Certain kind of monkeys, Capuchin monkeys, let's say, they have a certain morphic field. And there's a morphic field that governs human beings. So, and for example, the morphic field that governs human beings, we might say, is the same thing as what Jung called the collective unconscious. Right. Contains all kinds of archetypes and deep memories and deep knowledges that don't belong to particular individuals necessarily, but are sort of the broad inheritance of humanness. So I'm not really sure if I answered the question well, but basically there's this theory that these fields, they're called morphic because morph means shape, and they govern shape. But they also, Sheldrake was very interested in the ways that these fields interacted. And I actually believe that the way that morphic fields interact is the secret behind, the real secret, behind the law of attraction, or what's known as the law of attraction. And my idea of how this works is a lot different from the Rhonda Byrne version, where you visualize a diamond necklace and it appears upon your chest.
Right.
Instead, it's the notion that as Sheldrake liked to say, if something within the field, how do I say this? He liked to talk about the ways in which you could activate, memories within the field, not just memories. How am I going to say this? It gets a little bit complicated. It's the idea of morphic resonance, which is that something that has a similar field, two similar fields act upon one another much more strongly than two dissimilar fields. Right. So if I'm a monkey and I've learned how to do something and I'm the monkey innovator, I've just discovered how to wash these coconuts and no monkey has ever done this before, because of morphic resonance, because my monkey field will influence other monkey fields, the other monkeys will learn from me very rapidly how to wash these coconuts, even if I'm not even in their presence. So another way that this phenomenon of morphic resonance works, in my experience, is that the more loving and generous I become, the more loving and generous people appear in my life. And as it turns out, loving and generous people tend to make good things happen in one's life. And so this eventually leads to an experience of bounty and happiness and all of that kind of good stuff.
Which connects totally with the joy gifting. And also another thing that it makes me think about in relationship to the rest of the book is, I think you talked about this, but in the book, but if each person has it, then humanity as a whole has a morphic field. And to me, that relates to the idea of each of us having our own life purpose or sacred contract, as Carolyn Meis wrote, talk about. Meis. And so that morphic field, we're sort of like one organism, and that morphic field can sort of direct different gifts in different directions into creating something wonderful. Or is that my own extrapolation?
No, that is such a very, very excellent and a very crucial and important point, is that the work of cultivating one's field or one's soul to the point that it is in this very kind of loving and joyous space is not only is it good for you, but it does affect the whole morphic field of humanity, and therefore, the whole collective unconscious, the whole experience of human awareness on this earth. And it's so, so powerful. The author, David R. Hawkins, he interests me very much, and he's a consciousness researcher. And he's done this work which, sort of similar to what we're talking about, he's interested in the ways in which levels of awareness works. And he talks about the unconditional love level of awareness. And he says that, and you could debate exactly how he gets these numbers, but I still find it a provocative thought. He likes to say that 1,000 people who are in unconditional love consciousness, like the consciousness, say, that Jesus embodied, are capable of influencing the earth to the point that they overcome the negative influence of millions of people who are in the consciousness of self-centered fear.
Right. Yeah, I've heard. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Well, yeah, you go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that idea. What I was talking about sort of like differentiation of different people having different roles, is that you can trust. Because to me, this book seems about like finding your truest gifts, the thing that you can really do, like the piece of the puzzle that goes into making everything different. And then if you trust that different people's gifts do work together and there's kind of a wholeness to the puzzle because of the morphic field, then you can just trust that, okay, I'm not doing everything. Like, sometimes I feel like I have to do everything, but I don't, because I have the thing that's in front of me, and that is my job. If that makes sense.
Oh, that makes so much sense. And yes, I completely failed to address that.
No, it's okay.
Specificity that you were talking about.
Your point
yes,
was worth covering. It was a good thing that not everybody's probably heard about.
Yeah, well, so let me go ahead and say something about that specificity. Is I think it's absolutely the case that, sort of similar to the way in which we're all special flowers. I was just thinking of similar to the way in which the earth manifests, distinct species of flowers and plants that all play very specific roles in ecosystems. We as humans have very specific roles within our society together. So, yeah, one of the very big influences or emphases of the book is on this notion of turning up that energy, turning up that love in order to free the specific gift or the specific genius that we each have. So the genius, the notion of genius is very intimately tied to the notion of soul. Sometimes they're kind of indistinguishable. But the way that the Romantics in the 19th century like to talk about genius was that it was something that you produced and you couldn't explain to anybody how you produced it, because it came from something that was so uniquely you that there was just no way for it to be transferable. And this idea has kind of gone out of fashion in the 20th century, the 21st century. And to me, there's no reason for it to be out of fashion, because I feel it's very, very true that, I've seen, like, for example, I just got engaged, so I'm a little bit all lovey-dovey, but the gentleman I'm engaged to, his name's Matthew, and he's a visual artist and a musician, and the things that he produces are so, like, far out and so absolutely unique to him that I couldn't in my wildest dreams, like, imagine producing a drawing like one that he does, or a piece of music like one that he has. And that kind of individuality that he could never teach me to, produce that, as long as he might try, I find so fascinating, and so valuable. And something that I find also very interesting about the way that our society is currently structured is how passionately and adamantly it tries to stamp out and ignore and not reward or foster those, profoundly unique manifestations of soul, of genius.
Right. Well, that world has a different kind of system. Like, they're both systems. There's the system that is natural and holistic, and our natural heart's calling and fits in with the morphic field and all that. And then there's the system that's still pretty industrialized. It's sort of like we're all big cogs in a machine, and our roles, we can choose what roles we want, but the roles are dictated as to what makes that machine work. And so a lot of roles get ignored completely, and people end up in doing jobs that they hate, but that support the status quo in the system so that they can get health insurance and support their family. And because they don't have a sense that there's really a good way around that, except for being a lazy bum.
That is so eloquently said, Epiphany.
Yes. Yes. But it's systems, so there's still specialization of roles, with all the roles fitting together to do something, but it's to a very different purpose.
And what you said is so wise, in that the specialization of roles that we have is mechanistic, and it's boring, and it's not like the gorgeous variety of nature. And there's this notion that I keep coming back to again and again, because I find it so fascinating, which is this notion of control, and just how deeply our society, and most of us, me included, as individuals, are obsessed with control and defense and protection, to the point that our defenses are very obviously attacks, and to the point that we suffocate what we try to control. So when I think of these various roles that you're allowed to have in our society and allowed to be kind of conventionally rewarded for, roles like teacher, policeman, business person, accountant, engineer, on and on, and how I taught college for 7 years, and it broke my heart all the time, because I would meet these beautiful young people, 19, 20-year-olds, and they were hell-bent on getting the greatest resume together so that they could be, the world's greatest brain surgeon or accountant or marketer. And they would not give they couldn't even, it was so difficult for them to even fathom that they might keep a dream journal or read some poetry or do anything that didn't serve the goal of fulfilling the specialization that they had chosen. And I was very sympathetic about that. I could not judge them for that, because I know that they were choosing to do that because they got the very clear message from their parents and from society that they would not be economically sustained unless they did these things. Which is basically, if you think about it, these young people and ourselves are under a kind of death threat at all times. we're always being threatened with exile from our society. It's sort of like, I can't even, what ancient tribe would have ever, what could you be exiled for? Blaspheming the gods or killing somebody maybe in your own family. In our society, you can be exiled for not doing everything in your power to shape yourself into the world's ideal marketer. And that it's such an aberration. I can hardly even begin to describe it. It just makes me so sick and so sad. And, well, anyway, so what I'm interested in doing, I can't stand the idea of a world in which I somehow figure out how to succeed, but everybody else still suffers. That doesn't seem like a worthwhile goal to me.
Right.
And it's a goal that many people just accept because of humility, I think, because they don't trust maybe that something else is possible, so they're just trying to get by, and certainly susceptible to that thinking myself. But the more that we all begin, and I know that you understand this, Epiphany, and probably many of our listeners do, but I'm just saying it for the sake of reaffirming it, the more that we begin to actively, fearlessly, lovingly forge a new world, the less that we have to continue to endure this aberration.
Yeah. Well, and it's getting to the point to some degree that there's not a lot of choice on the matter. Like if you look at economic collapse, as more and more people don't have jobs, there's not even options for fitting in to the old system. And I say old, in a relative sense, because there's much older systems. But if you don't fit into this industrial system that we have that is currently failing, you're exiled. But at the same time, there's not really as many ways to connect to it anymore anyway. So its death is sort of an opening.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And that's what I'm started writing about now, and what I'm so interested in is the way in which this world, I like to call it Babylon, that's a colorful term for it. No offense to actual Babylonians, but, Babylon you're exactly right. It's dying, it's falling, it's cannibalizing itself, and it's disenfranchised so many people, and the Occupy movement is about this in many ways, and there's this whole class of people now that's called the precariat, and I'm a part of this class, and most of the people that I know are. And precariat, of course, is a term that comes from combining the words proletariat and precariousness. And it's basically a giant class of people who, we're not even working class anymore because we can't get jobs to work. Right. So we're either unemployed or underemployed, or we're working freelance jobs that we don't know if we'll have it next month, and we might be on government assistance, or we might be living with our parents. Basically, a whole giant, the millennial generation, this has happened to us. And anyways, you're exactly right, and the time is really ripe for us to completely wake out of the fog of thinking that a job might be desirable, or that somehow fighting to keep the old society going and to win ourselves a plum place in it, and instead just all wake up and together make something much, much more beautiful happen.
Right. And if I understand your book correctly, because I'm not totally at the I'm not totally there yet, but you have the mad world and the gift world.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I understand the concept of the gift world right, that world is there. Like we can create it in the structures with our actions, but it is there.
Very, very good point. Yes, it is always there. It's always underlying everything, and it's always available for us to experience it. Because it's in itself, it's a level of consciousness. It's there's Ken Keyes Jr., who wrote the Handbook to Higher Conscious, called it the cornucopia level. And it's a level of awareness wherein your love is creating a continual experience of bounty for you. And that's what I think queer Jesus meant when he said that, the kingdom of heaven is at hand, is that it's always accessible. It's up to us to choose to be deeply receptive to it. And yes, and just like you said, it's also a matter of us learning to create societal structures that support, enforce, encourage that consciousness instead of the structures we have now, which very much foster the consciousness of fear and separation.
Right, which is the kind of consciousness that creates the hoarding and the destruction of the earth.
Precisely.
So we have just a couple minutes left, give or take, because it is kind of an arbitrary time frame. Mm-hmm. Would you like to talk just a little bit about the coaching work that you do?
Oh, I would love to, yes. So I have the great privilege of working with people to do a form of counseling that I like to call compassionate inquiry. And it's based in the work of Byron Katie. She's my mentor and a great inspiration. Byron Katie has this process called the work, which is a kind of guided meditation that involves locating what our stressful thoughts are and questioning them, questioning their truth, questioning what effects they create in our lives, and opening to the possibility of who we might be without those specific beliefs. So Byron Katie's insights revolutionized my life, and but I often found that many people aren't quite ready for the intensity of the work as a meditation, in that the questions can be sometimes very blunt and difficult to open to. And actually I found that in my own practice, the questioning part of the work works much better when I'm actively doing joy gifting. Because those questions, it's sort of like the heart has to ask them and the heart has to answer them, because if the mind answers them, you get exactly nowhere. So compassionate inquiry is sort of my way of combining that energy of joy gifting, that love energy, with the laser focus of inquiry. And so what I do is I hold a space of very deep love and positive regard for my client, and we have a conversation which involves the questioning of stressful beliefs, but which also involves just creating a rapport and a connection and a level of trust that allows us to go very deep and to see what life could be like without those thoughts, or with those thoughts turned around and altered. So one very powerful thing that this kind of counseling work does for people is it begins to show them just how much responsibility they have for creating the quality of their relationships, the quality of their daily emotional state. And it almost sounds sort of like easy to say that, but I guess I just want to invite everybody to sort of imagine, if you really knew that you were responsible for the vast majority of how you experience the world, and you had a way to change that so that you could have a really free and peaceful and joyful experience of the world, that's a huge, huge thing. So this is work that I've done very intensely with myself, and it's something that it's just such a blessing to be able to do it with other people, because the messages that we get about how the mind works and how we generate reality, either they're completely confused, sort of like somewhat bullshit, explanations of it, or they deny that we have any power to create our experience of life, and send a message of, we're just at the mercy of external things. And it's my experience that I'm at the mercy of nothing, that I choose to make myself sad, I choose to make myself stressed out or resentful, and that I always have the option of being peaceful and joyful, and it's just a matter of how deeply am I willing to accept that option, and what do I think I am gaining by my refusal to be peaceful, joyful, loving at any given moment. So yes, I love to share that with people, and people have, it's a tough thing, because I think I put myself out of work as a counselor in that people have 1 or 2 sessions with me and they're like, Carolyn, I'm completely changed. I understand. I'm okay now. And I'm like, well, wow, that's so great. And then I'm like, oh, guess I need to find some more clients.
Yeah, that seems like a bit of a conundrum.
It's a happy one, though. I'm okay with it.
One thing I really like about the way you've described it here and otherwise is that you really are good at seeing people's best potential. So when you hold space, you can kind of just give them room to get there. I don't know how to describe it better than that, but I like that. Because to me, that's what it should be like.
Oh, yes. So it's interesting. I have friends who are psychic, who can literally see the future. And I don't have that particular psychic power, but I do quite strongly have the psychic power of being able to see the best possibility or best self in someone, which I like to think is a matter of, it's a matter of seeing their field, their soul, and by seeing, I mean intuiting. So that faculty is a great aid in allowing me to, how do I explain? When I'm listening to someone, I can listen with them and completely join with them, and I can hear very clearly the ways in which they're lying to themselves, in the sense that I can see the kind of beautiful truth that they're not seeing in who they are, in what they can do. And so this can be, this is its own, I've had to learn how to both meet people where they are, where they believe they are, in order to kind of help them step into the big possibilities for them that I can intuit. And but yeah, it's certainly the case that I found that people do feel very helped by being in the presence of somebody who doesn't see them as little, limited, fear-mongering, I don't know what, whatever we tend to believe that we are in our self-doubting or worst moments. And that in itself, that empathy and that belief, to me, well, in my own experience, when people have given me that's been the most healing possible thing. So yeah, it's wonderful to be able to give that to others.
Very nice. And could you share the website?
Yes. So my website is www.awesomeyourlife.com, and there's links to, you can see the counseling sessions tab, and you can email me. My email address is sweetsongofjoy@gmail.com. And
there's also the blog on there that has the articles that are related to the book, the website.
Yes. If you go to the tab that says the archives, you can find a lot of that.
Very cool. So, I think we're going to wrap up the show. I want to thank a couple people. Mr. Brian Paris helped me set all the technical stuff up. Thank you. And all the music today was Bill Buchholtz, who is a good friend of mine. Flute music and piano. And then if people want to stay in touch with the show, you can do so in several ways. There's the website, which is connectingbetween.com, which was the closest to the space between I could get. And on there's an email list that you can sign up for, and also links to how to connect on Twitter and Facebook. Twitter name is Space Between, and Facebook page is The Space Between. It's facebook.com/The Space Between. So those are all great ways to connect. Please, anybody let me know if you have any questions or comments or feedback, if you would be interested in sharing any music, donating any music for use for the show, or if you would like to be on the show or know someone that you think would be perfect for the show. I hope everybody has enjoyed listening. I have very much enjoyed talking to both of these wonderful women that I have had the fortune to interview today. Carolyn, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Epiphany.
I appreciate it. It's been awesome.
Yes.
Yay. And we'll talk to Carolyn again on September 16th when we'll follow up and talk about all these concepts just a little bit more. So thank you again for coming on. And everybody have a great week. Thank you for joining us in this journey today. Although we are in confusing times, perhaps there is hope. Perhaps not all is lost. Perhaps we can still transform ourselves, our relationship with each other and the planet. May we find our way to a different way of life together. As you go through your week, may you reflect and realize that you too have unique gifts to share. When you fully embody your own spirit, sharing your gifts can enrich not only your own life, but ripples of healing change can extend outward from yourself, touching others. We are in this together, and we can do this together.